Okay, because I mean, it's super close, right?
All right, guys, I think I'm going to get us rolling.
Okay.
So, we're here for, what is the name of this panel again?
What are we
What did
doing?
I actually name it? I know it's thematically, but what did I name it? I forgot what I named
Writing
it.
sex scenes in erotica.
Yeah, writing sex in erotica. Thank you. Catherine's more on the ball than I am today. The way I'm going to run this one is I'm going to run it sort of like a convention panel, where we're going to let the panelists introduce themselves. I'm going to kind of moderate with some questions and stuff. We'll go for a while, and then once I've let these kind people have their say about sex, erotica, romance, whatever, in fiction, or I don't care, in real life, whatever. Then we'll kick it out to you guys for questions and stuff, because I'm sure that you've got questions.
Awesome.
Sunday morning. So
It really does it.
it really is. You guys got questions. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. I'm going to skip the going around the room. Sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't. I'm going to skip it this time, I think. So we're going to start down here.
Oh my God. My name's Elise Mathison. I've written a little bit of, a small bit of fiction, science fiction, fantasy. And I have been getting back into it and submitting a bunch of things that are older that I've been revising and writing some new stuff. So I'm the person on this panel who's saying, I'm trying to figure out how to do this without screwing up too badly. I have a ton of questions, and actually one of the reasons I'm really glad I'm here is that I'm hearing impaired initially. I can hear everything they say. What else am I? Writer, poet, editor, travel writer. That's it. Oh, and have in fact written erotica for money, and that's quite a story.
Looking forward to that. I'm Catherine Lundoff. I'm a local author and editor. I'm the author of 2 award-winning collections of erotica, and I also write science fiction and fantasy and romance and some nonfiction and a bunch of other stuff. I'm in the process of splitting myself into 2 and spinning off a new me who is going to be writing work with explicit sex, in part because I also have a day job, and you really haven't lived until one of your coworkers trots up to your cube, clutching a collection of your vampire erotica, holds it out and says, I bought this online, you want to sign it for me? There's a little bubble that comes up that says HR moment. But I've taught classes on erotic writing at the Loft. I've been asked to come back and teach that again, so I'll be probably teaching that again in the spring. And yeah, so lots of stuff going on, so I can talk about all of it at once.
Hi, I'm Devin Harnois. I write all kinds of stuff, including some paranormal romance and various other stuff like that, so they invited me on. It's like, I don't know if I'm an expert, but I'll go, sure, why not? I know about writing sex scenes.
There you go, you're an expert.
You hadn't paid money to do it.
It's true, people do buy stuff from me, so yes, occasionally.
Right, so Catherine was good enough, as she just told you guys, she's going to be teaching at the Loft again. And she was good enough to hand me her notes, which is great, because I had forgot to make notes. I had stuff in my head, but it's Sunday morning. And so I'm just going to start with the very first thing here that she got on here, which is purpose of the story. And so how does the purpose of the story determine whether you're just going to write a sex scene, whether it's erotica, whether it's horny as opposed to erotica? Maybe, wait, let's back up. Let's define.
Well, that's 4 hours.
Sum up.
Don't go there.
Sum up a little bit. What may be the difference, the useful differences between a sex scene, erotica, and just writing straight porn? As it were.
Okay.
All I got is a story about how I accidentally wrote erotica because you didn't tell me the anthology wasn't erotica. So.
I did.
I missed that part. Okay, she probably did.
You were ignoring me in the favor of doing what you wanted to do, but that was
I was
okay.
distracted. Actually, no, I totally missed it, and I wrote this thing, and I was like, oh, but you still bought it.
That's true. That's true.
It was the first. What was the description? The first ghost story, dead lesbians with vibrators pornography. Yeah.
Yes, a reviewer did describe it that way.
Yes.
I think since the notes came out of my head this morning, just go on down the line. For me, a sex scene is something that is part of a larger work that may or may not be erotic in nature. So it's, you know, it's part of your character development, it's part of your scene building, it's part of your plot, but it's not exactly the purpose of the work that you're doing. Erotica, the sex scenes are the purpose of what you're doing. You're trying to involve your reader. If possible, you're trying to arouse your reader, but above all else, you don't want your reader to ever be indifferent to what you're doing. Erotic romance, you're dealing with a lot of the romance tropes. Traditionally, that's been the notion of happily ever after. You know, the couple, the menage, whatever the vast group of people on the octopus are all getting together and then they will be together at the end of it. However, as romance has been changing, there's more of a notion of happily for now. And you get that a lot more in a lot of the erotic romance that's out there. And it's, you know, the sex scenes are part of the story. They're integral to your plot. If you take them out, you will have a completely different story that may not be the story you intended to tell. Porn tends to be visual, tends to not have a great deal in the way of character development or plot or necessarily story. But the line between it and erotica can be pretty fine. And you know, you'll see lots of cutesy little references to "I know it when I see it," and really, you know, some of it is to a large extent in the eye of the beholder of what the dividing line is there. For me, erotica is something that actually tells a story. It may be telling the story with sex, but there's a story. Porn is just to get off for me, but that's, you know, my personal take on it.
Do you think porn it has a lot of keywords, and there's the whole, for those people for whom the keywords work, there's stimulus response, and that's what it is?
Pretty much, yeah. Visual too. I mean, I think the visual component, I think, is also pretty important for a lot of folks who utilize a great deal of porn. But
what do you mean about visual component?
Movies and pictures.
Okay. Okay.
Well, the expert. You're more expert than me.
Woo!
Well, no, I agree.
I'll just talk a lot for the next 2 hours.
I agree, though. Like that, there's that the fine line of argument between porn and erotica, but erotica is really just the sex drives the story itself. What happens in the sex scenes is the story itself, and then erotic romance is there's an element of relationship in there that drives the story, and then a sex scene, of course, is just a scene with sex in it. And you could probably take sex scenes out and still have the story hold up, but if you took sex scenes out of erotica, there would be nothing left.
Okay.
Conrad raised his hand.
I'm just curious if you can help define how the genre slash fits into or does not fit into all this.
Slash often tends to kind of spill over into erotic romance for me anyway. I mean, I don't really read or write much slash, so I bow to the expertise of it.
I read a bunch of it, and I think it's like any other writing. It can fit into all of those categories, and it depends on the particular work, because there's some slash which is specifically written to say, here, if you have these buttons, you'll like this. Black some time on it for it.
I would say it's very much dependent on what the author is doing with it. So if the author's intent is, it would be so hot if these two got together and that's all they think about, that it might be that just pure erotica or even porn. And then if it's more like, oh, you know, let's build a relationship, let's, you know, make this more of a character thing, then it slowly becomes like erotic romance, and it might even branch right out into just a romance.
Or in the case of somebody who really needed to write, in her case, a very long series based on her television show, she was watching The West Wing. She started watching The West Wing. And as I heard it told, one of her friends came into the room and watched a little bit of an interaction between, Sam and Josh, is it? I can't even remember the characters, but...
Those are two names from
Sam and Josh. And they said, they used to be involved, didn't they? That's the only thing that explains all of this bitchiness back and forth. And she was like, oh my God.
Yeah, like what's that intent and the spark for that story? Is it like, there's so much backstory here and they're totally in love, and then it becomes like a broader thing, or else somebody's like, if you saw it after they just did it or something, you know?
Slash is kind of interesting also in that it gave birth to a lot of the contemporary ebook explosion. A lot of the highly successful authors online who write romance, who write erotica, who write erotic romance, many of them came out of the slash community, and many of them built their reputations through their slash.
I guess I hear the term slash all the time, but I don't actually know what that is, never having researched it or looked at it.
Well, the term originally, and correct me if I'm wrong, comes from the fanzines that got written around the original Star Trek, in which Kirk and Spock have a relationship, so they were known as K/H. That was the shorthand for it. Mm-hmm. And since then, as you get more shows, more fan involvement, there's a slash fan base for almost anything you can think of. And then there's crossover. My personal favorite being like M. Craig, Harry Potter, CSI crossover. Which makes my brain hurt just thinking about it, yet I have been told it's out there.
So this has nothing to do with like slash as in like knife.
No, it's like
because
slash
that's what I was
symbol.
thinking.
It was part of how you had to let them know.
It's way worse than that.
Yeah.
It was part of how you had to let them know which characters were involved. And one of the ways you could tell an older slash fan, not in age, but in generation of readership, if you know what I mean, is whether they can recite to you all the various arguments explaining that a heterosexual pairing is not slash.
What about
Old fan feuds.
what about a heterosexual pairing between two homosexual characters?
I'm sorry?
Two
It's two characters who may or may not be of any particular
No,
sexual
two characters
orientation.
who are definitely two characters of opposite sexes, both in the canon are completely homosexual, but they're getting it on in these.
There's a phrase called "gay for you" that turns up in a lot of this stuff, which is I'm not gay, but I'd certainly sleep with you, which is how you lump the whole Kirk Spock thing.
And the straight for you variants.
Yes, there is a straight for you variance. Yeah.
So,
Everything is possible, let's just say.
everything is possible.
Everything is possible.
Not necessarily desirable, but possible.
And if you want to read the best Avengers /fic in the world, go to an archive of our own and look up Sci-Fi Girl 47. It's not so much the Captain America and Iron Man, but, although that's obvious. It's Phil Coulson and Clint Barton. Oh my God. They are hilarious and perfect. Phil's got a suit. Clint just wants to mess it up.
So relationship building, when we're talking about whether it's romance or just love scenes or whatever, how do we do that? Talk about the relationship building.
I think it's just a case not so much even of how do we do that, but how do we stop stopping ourselves from getting into it? Because it's character building like anything else, only I think a lot of times we stop before that scene. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Or to use an example of a mystery series that my wife was reading, each and every time it seemed like the characters were going to have a romantic relationship, the protagonist gets run over by a horse and cart, dropped from a helicopter, in one case hit by a train, and shot. These are extreme examples of avoiding talking about, the relationship that apparently cannot be named or experienced.
Wow. That writer really didn't want them to get together.
Really didn't want them to get together. Liked the idea, but not so much the writing of it. I think that, one of the things that's important, especially if you're writing erotica or erotic romance, is the notion of building both emotional content into your character's relationship and building sexual tension into it. Sexual tension is a really, really important component, both of erotica and erotic romance, and without that, there's not much there. What you've got is, two characters that are They almost go out on a date, they almost kiss, they almost touch. And some of it is that element in the almost, the unsuccessful date, the kiss that doesn't work out, the date that falls apart, the moment when they get hit by a horse and cart. All of this stuff kind of builds into a point that helps your readers get invested into those characters and their relationship. And that's really what you want. You never want them to not care what these characters are doing, whether that's jumping out of a plane, or whether that's getting together with their long-lost love, or with the person that they have this horribly bitchy relationship with. Whatever that relationship is, you want your characters to care what they're doing. And one of the ways you do that, apart from showing them those as three-dimensional people, is to build the notion of a sexual tension that pulls them in. The characters, the reader wants to know what's going to happen next. And that's really critical to how you set that up.
You're so much more articulate than I am.
Have some more caffeine.
That actually is the cure. It might not make me articulate, it will make me talk a lot. Yeah, I think the key with relationship building is that the sex scene, especially in a romance, is like every other scene. There is more than one purpose to this scene. You're moving the story forward, you're exploring the characters. I see people making the mistake of treating a sex scene like it's a separate unit. They take everything out of it and it's just like insert tab A into slot B. And the emotion is flat and the story doesn't go forward and things don't change. It should be a continuum. The sex scene starts, things happen, and at the end of that sex scene, there is a difference. Something happened. The characters relate to each other differently. They have a big fight and, something, or they're, closer to each other and all that kind of stuff. So if that scene was missing and your reader reads this story, they go, wait a minute, how did we get from here to here? Because that scene is key. So that's what I think is a big important component of that, is that a relationship changes when there's a sex scene.
Like in a really good musical, the song advances the plot.
Right? If you cut the song out, you'd be like, wait, how did we get from here to here? Did we miss something?
Isn't there a musical monologue in here somewhere?
Where's the I Want song?
I suppose the analogy would be that if you've got a musical and you're just dropping in a set piece song that doesn't change the plot, that's just porn scene. Nice, fun, doesn't change anything.
And then with Erotica, the sex scene is the story. So all of the stuff that happens in there is the exploration of that relationship through sex. It's very much more focused.
I would say that it drives the story. I don't know if I would agree that it is the story necessarily. It can be. You can do that, but it's ultimately the reason you're writing the story is that it's a driver for it. But I don't know if I necessarily say
the sex is
there shouldn't be more
action
around it
of
than
the
that.
story.
Can be.
It's what happens to move the story and the characters and the relationship.
There's a panel.
It's a
in
goal.
There's a panel in this.
Like the one we're on right now.
Yeah.
There's a whole other panel. I think. So.
Or it can become a conflict, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, and I mean, that again is something else that drives your story.
Like you think that the person that you're with really loves you or whatever, and then at the end of the sex scene, there's the paranoia of like, maybe this was just the one night stand, or, oh no, did I reveal too much? There's so much that can happen in that scene to change the characters, the relationship, the story itself. Yeah, cool stuff can happen.
Let's see. Okay, I'm going to ask about a genre which I don't read because I'm not a horror fan. What erotic horror?
Not my area of expertise.
What do you want to know about erotic horror?
Yeah,
Having written enough one or two things.
okay,
Oh, off you go.
let's see.
Erotic horror is kind of its own interesting subset. It's hard to pull it off and keep it both horrific and erotic. I wrote a short story a number of years ago called Emily Says, and it's about this woman who picks up a succubus at a party, and she's the only one who can see her. And she's disintegrating psychologically and physically over the course of the story. And it's, people either absolutely love it and want to hear it again and again, or they never ever want to hear it again, and they want me to never mention that I have ever written this thing.
Wow, and not unsee?
Yeah, it's definitely, it's like this very, very strict line. And, you know, and I think that is, to some degree, is probably a basis for writing erotic horror, is that it is either your thing or it is, oh my God, so much not your thing. And it's hard to achieve that balance. It really is. It's much easier to do a science fiction novel, easier relatively speaking, you know, or you know, some kind of fantasy context around the sex than it is to make it truly horrific. So
Yeah,
you didn't actually
I've
ask
always
the
been,
question, so I'm just reassociating.
Okay,
I've always admired
thank you.
you for
Let's,
that.
and of course, so there are writers who know, who are certain that everybody has the same taste, and the people who say they don't are either lying to everybody else or lying to themselves.
Need more to go on.
But let's say, and let's see, and oddly enough, the only one of them that I knew personally had a history of mental illness, or spending time in hospitalized for mental illness.
Is there a question in here somewhere?
Okay, I'm just saying that in a way that there are writers who feel this way, and if you are certain that you know that you know what everybody likes, or everybody of a certain category likes, you are going to be somewhat surprised.
I'm not real sure there's a question going on here. This is more of a statement, so I'm just going to kind of move us on, I think is what I'm going to do here. I don't know, just haven't articulated what you want to get at. So, but I'm just going to kind of keep us going here. So I'm going to now ask you guys technical stuff. Ooh, okay, so we're going to start with easy technical stuff.
Words!
So considerations between long form and short form.
I see.
What do you, first of all, when do you know you're going to do long form, short form? And then, we've talked about the building the relationship and the building the tension. And so from just a technical point of view, what are some of the different things you have to consider, whether you're writing novel length, novella length, or very short length? Go.
I've only done short things, and I'm working on a very long thing. So I'm coming up against exactly some of those questions. It is not intended to be erotica per se, but what I'm doing is not backing away from showing the character interactions as they come along. So I don't know, but I think I'm gonna have to find out along the way. The shortest things I've written have been flash fiction for very particular audiences, meaning very small audiences, or the weirdest erotica writing gig, the weirdest pornography writing gig I ever had was to ghostwrite for a dominatrix's clients a story they read aloud in session, which is a fascinating use of pornography, really, and it paid the best of any. I've never gotten $1 a word since. But that one had to be, there was a very strict word limit, and it had to, I was given précis of the person's fantasies, the person's, their stuff.
They're
and
kids.
had to craft a first-person narrative that they would read out loud. And that was a fascinating assignment because there was no room for character development, but also you kind of had the character right there, it was the person who was reading it. But it had to all fit. And so as I'm working on this long thing, I'm thinking, wow, this is so the opposite of that, and yet it's not, in a way. Everything that the people on the long form, I hope, are going to do has to be. So I'm floundering. That's where I am.
Well, I've written quite a bit of short erotica. I've also written several novella-length pieces, and I just completed my first novel. And you know, I think for me as a writer, one of the advantages of long form over short form is you've got a lot more space to play with things. You have multiple sex scenes, and you have multiple things going on around it, and you have all kinds of drivers for various situations. I will tell you right now that if you're interested in doing erotic fiction, long form pays a hell of a lot better than short form, I'm just saying. And the last time I got $1 a word, we bought a new couch. Let me just but it's the opportunity to do a lot of things around it while including graphic sex as a key element to the story that you're telling. You get a lot more of the sense of characters, you spend a lot more time with the characters than you do with short fiction, and there's just a lot more story building that has to go into it. The other thing is that it's easier to hold a reader's attention for short fiction, for short erotic fiction, than it is for longer works, unless you're doing it well. It's much more easy for it to be, you have, the beginning part works well, and then something happens, they wander off, they go do the dishes, they don't come back. And you don't ever want that. You always want them to come back. So you've got the opportunity to build on each of the situations you've already created so that you've got a story that's telling a fairly complex story about a relationship, but you've built it over time. And I think that is making it more attractive to me. I'm trying to do more long form now.
To me, my feeling of it is just like every other story is just kind of what is my gut sense of how much scope is in this idea. And if it's just a very narrow idea, then it would be a short story. And it grows from there. Like how many elements am I playing with? How much time? How many other characters? What is the plot kind of idea of it? And it sometimes I get it wrong. And usually I err on the side of like, I think it might be shorter than it is, and then it gets bigger as I go along. But yeah, it's just, it's like everything else. It's just, what really is your intent? If it's just an idea of two people who are exploring an aspect of their relationship through sex, then it's probably a short story. If it's like, two people meet and over time there's all this sexual exploration until by the end that they're a couple, then maybe it's a novel.
I should say I've also recently discovered outlining. It was a big thing. Great excitement.
I still hate outlines.
I wrote my first novel, Pantsing, and we're not doing that again.
I pants all the time.
Pants. Anyway, so how do you as a writer decide what you're comfortable with as far as in erotica and stuff? There's all sorts of kinks out there. There's one of the rules of the internet, I think it's 43, is there's porn for everything. How do you as a writer decide? The reader can figure out what the hell they're comfortable with when they pick up the book. How do you as a writer decide what you're comfortable with?
I think that unfolds into two questions for me.
Okay.
What are my characters comfortable with, and how comfortable am I about telling the truth about that?
And with that, if you'd like to actually sell your work, there are certain legal issues involved. Wait, yes. So some things are pretty much universally illegal, or you will never find a publisher to touch them regardless of whether or not they are officially illegal or not. In general, they are underage characters, sex with animals, certain kinds of BDSM, particularly scat, which is playing with excrement. And there are markets that cater to it, but they're very, very small.
Specialized.
Highly specialized markets. But yeah, the two biggies are animals and underage sex.
I got
Now-
a bestiality thing.
Yeah, I know. Now, animals is like actual barnyard animals, not the were-tiger that you picked up at the bar last night. Okay, so that's kind of the gray zone on the animals thing. But these are things that are pretty common. There's also the assumption when you write erotica that people are inclined to believe that you are writing about your personal experiences. I have taken to telling people that I am, in fact, a middle-aged vampire in my copious free time, however. And that also can spill over into your comfort level and impact what you are willing to write about. You know, is also the assumption that, well, you must have done it. Like, no, sometimes you just do a lot of research.
There's this thing called imagination.
That too. Yeah.
The way, one way to get around the bestiality thing was to have two human characters doing something in a barn near some horses with one of them fantasizing very heavily. Perfectly legal. Hit the buttons I needed to hit on that particular story. Really interestingly difficult to write, and because you're writing this situation where you have two characters who are having sex with each other that they mean something to each other, they mean different things to each other, which is part of the problem, and one of them in their head is very carefully being somewhere else because that has more of an erotic charge for them than the sex they were actually having, which was pretty energetic. So, actually, question for you, how do you, sex scene writing isn't just writing about the sex that happens, it's also writing about how the characters do the sex that happens and what the hell is going on in their head that we don't see or that the other characters don't see but we do, and how do you play with that? Because that's the interesting part to me.
Yeah. Yes. I agree that it's interesting.
It's complicated and people don't know what each other means.
That's where that relationship stuff comes in, where these are people with their own baggage and their own expectations and their own emotions, and yet they're doing something very intimate with each other. And how much of that intimacy really happens? Is it just a matter of them like physically communicating, or are they communicating on a deeper level? Are they actually emotionally communicating? And that's where that whole thing comes in, where it's like, what people want to explore, is it that the first time that they have sex together that they're, emotionally restrained, and then over time it becomes that they're, revealing themselves through that intimate connection.
And is the act an act, or is the act an act and a commitment of a certain thing, and do they agree on what that is? And,
and then sort of like talking comes into it, like
that's the dangerous part,
right? If they're everybody should be, with a few exceptions, like generally a sex scene should include some dialogue. And that's part of that interest too, where it's like, are they just trying to avoid saying things? Are they actually trying to talk to each other about what's going on and, what do you like and that kind of thing? Or why is this bothering you? Or, how communicative are they?
There was a short story I wrote for Carol Queen, who did an anthology called 5-Minute Erotica. And I had a particular mission with that one. Carol said in her call for submissions, she said, I'm doing an anthology. It's vanilla erotica this time, you guys. So, you'll never hear me ask this question usually, but will you write me a piece of vanilla erotica? If that seems like something boring or something you want to do, remember, your story might be the thing that gets some nice woman to masturbate for the first time. Which is a fascinating and brilliant call for submission, really. Because it put a whole bunch of compressed a whole bunch of the things into one line there. The story that I wrote eroticized consent and talking about sex. The only erotic action on screen was one kiss. And yet I've heard from a number of people, some of whom might have been nice women masturbating for the first time, that it really, really worked. Part of the setup for it was two characters that were getting together for, not the first time, but for early on in their getting together. One of them has a problem talking about sex. She's not used to it, she's not good at it, she's all embarrassed about it. And her new partner proposes that they get together and not have sex, but read a list of sexual things aloud to each other to find out what each other's reaction is. And the story takes off as she reads the first line and he says, "Ooh, Captain, may I?" And it goes from there. And the rule in their encounter is that they're not going to do it right then. They are just going to say the words. And that's the unresolved tension. That's the sexual tension about the incredible intimacy of saying words aloud for an act you might want to do or an act you might want to do, and being able to talk about boundaries and consent and bring up things you're afraid might scare the other person. And that's what I wanted to eroticize in it, the talking. And it's called Captain Maya.
On the other hand, one of the things that we didn't really touch on, we were talking about short versus long form, is that there's a lot of experimental things you can do with short form fiction that are not going to be successful long form. I have a story that's written entirely in second person present tense, in which only one character ever talks and the other one never says anything. It's been in a couple of years' best anthologies. So you can do it that way, but I could not turn around and write an entire novel that was second person present tense. You know, it's too literary a technique. It's not something that sustains well over 80,000 words, 90,000 words. 60,000 words. But it's something that you can play with in short form. And that's something that I think is worth thinking about when we're talking about, the different approaches to doing this.
Know when you're going to lose people?
Yeah.
I'm going to get to audience questions in a few minutes, so just keep your questions in hold. We're almost there. So you're talking about the size of the thing, story-wise.
Yeah, go there with me.
Easy pun. So let's talk about the marketing, though, because you touched on, there are some things you can't market, there are some things you don't want to write to them. This is not, usually in this group, I'm one of the guys they go to for market stuff, but not in this particular case. So let's talk about the market. How, who, where, what.
Okay, am I starting that one?
You might as well.
You better, because
Apparently I'm starting that one. Okay, all right. There's a number of online markets out there. There are a number of books out there with varying degrees of useful information on them. The main problem is that by the time a book on writing erotica or erotic romance, or really science fiction and fantasy, has actually hit print, it's out of date. So when you're looking at these things, if you're looking at something that is talking about specific markets, I wouldn't bother. See if you can get your library to pick it up. If you're looking at something that's talking about how to market, that's a much more useful tool. There's several online sites that include calls for stories. The biggest and best of them is a site called the Erotic Readers and Writers Association. It has calls for stories, there's writers' columns, there's a forum, there's all kinds of interesting information out there. This is a decent book. Full disclosure, I'm one of the contributors. It's How to Write and Sell Erotica by M. Christian. M. Christian is a prominent editor and author. He also writes science fiction, fantasy, and horror. He writes romance. He's been around forever. He does a lot of interesting stuff. And I'll pass that around so people can take a look at it. And I'll talk about this book later because it's more of a how-to. There's a couple of other sites that deal with different kinds of calls for stories. If you're familiar with Raylan's site, which is primarily science fiction, fantasy, and horror, he has a subset of adult markets out there too. And it's well worth looking at that as well because there's a lot of decent information out there. There's a couple of things. If you want to see what it looks like when an editor and publisher puts out what they absolutely will not accept, check out Circlet Press. Circlet Press is run by an author and editor named Cecilia Tan out of the Boston area, and it specializes in science fiction, fantasy, and horror erotica, and erotic romance. They also do some non-erotic titles. Delia Sherman's Through a Brazen Mirror is a pure fantasy novel. There's a lot of sexual tension, but it's not an erotica novel. So there's a lot of things that come out of there. And she has this marvelous, because she's been reading, she puts out 4 or 5 anthologies a year. The woman has read more direct than I can even imagine is out there. And she has very, very clear guidelines, and it makes for a really interesting read, especially if you're first starting out. Many things are flagged in capitals, just in case you're not clear on the emphasis. You know, but it gives you an idea of the kind of things that get overused. I mean, that's one of the things that you always look for when you're reading guidelines. You know, they're telling you what the editor's comfort level is. In some cases, they're telling you what the legal limits are for the editor in question. They're also telling you what's been overused. For example, when I wrote for one of Cecilia's anthologies a number of years ago, and she said, under no circumstances can the vampire pick up a victim in a bar. I also don't want to see any, secretly one of the characters is a vampire hunter, nor do I want any aha moments in which both of them turn out to be vampires. You'll never guess what I sent her. But anyway.
Did you manage to get it?
All three?
Actually, the second person story, which only one character talks, starts out in a bar. But you know, but again, it tells you that your odds of getting something accepted are much lower if you weigh in on something that they're saying they absolutely don't want to see, because you've got to be spectacular to sell that. And maybe you've got that story, maybe you don't. But unless you're pretty sure that you've got that story, you know. There are fewer markets for erotic short fiction than there used to be, largely because there are so many free sites. So when I started out, I've been writing and publishing. At this point, I've got, between the novels and everything else, something like almost 500,000 words of published fiction out there in various genres. When I started out, there were 5 or 6 anthologies a year minimum of literary erotica that I could write for. Now it's more like maybe 2. And there were more that I just wasn't writing for, because I wasn't interested in the topics. So it's a market that's kind of dwindled. What has not dwindled, however, is long form. And in part, that's also because of indie publishing and the changes in that. So people who are producing works that they might not have been able to sell earlier, you know, for a variety of reasons, you know, it was perceived that there wasn't a market for it. It's not necessarily, you know, obviously about quality, but it's about, you know, the perception on a publisher's part of whether or not they can market that work. And there's many more opportunities out there for doing a lot more indie publishing than there were, you know, 10 years ago, say, for example. At which point I'll pass it off to you, because you know more about that than I do.
All right, here's my rah-rah self-publishing moment. To a degree, anything that you can think of within the legal limits, there is a market for.
And outside some of them.
So, that's yes. But yes, if you want to go that route of self-publishing, I don't know. I'm not super up on it like right now. But about a year ago, the short fiction was still selling in a variety of subgenres. I know there has been more movement towards longer stuff lately, and I think part of that has to do with just the writers that are involved in it. I have some friends who do quite well for themselves. Yeah, so if you really want to get into this and are gung-ho, like, hey, I really want to write some erotica, I would say if you can't initially find a good market for it, try self-publishing. But be careful with your covers. Amazon does not like skin, so you might want to think a little bit more, a little less literal and a little more creatively about what you want to put on your cover. Because they will hide it in the naughty zone.
It also depends on whose skin and how much of it is.
Yeah, it's very, but in general,
yeah.
Watch how much skin you're putting on the cover because Amazon will hide it. So, but yeah, so self-publishing, yay. I just love the freedom of it. Like, I never have to worry when I start a story. My concern is never, oh no, is there a market for this? Like, I don't care.
Yeah, I feel differently. I like filthy lucre. I like to have it coming in occasionally. And so, one thing I just wanted to add about Amazon, I was one of the authors who got delisted a few years ago when they decided that they were going to fail to list anything with queer content or erotic content. And yeah, they do stuff like that. They change their algorithms, you disappear from the searches. You know, if you're traditionally published, they suddenly have a fight with your publisher. But the thing is, they're not alone on this. You know, Kobe Books has done a variation on it, Barnes & Noble has done a variation on it. So if you decide to indie publish, or even if you're looking at a traditional publisher, make sure that they have a variety of sales outlets, because the possibility, particularly when you're writing about sex, which is something that goes in and out of favor with great frequency, that it's something that you can, you know, if you've signed an agreement with Amazon and they're your only distributor, if somebody wakes up tomorrow and goes, ooh, I really don't like this stuff, you're going to be in trouble, because that's going to be all your sales, and you don't want that. So it's just something to kind of bear in mind, is that you want to make sure that you're on as many platforms as possible if you're going to do it that way.
All right, so I'm going to let you guys, I'm going to let you three guys then. Anything I have missed that you want to talk about, I want you to go, and then we'll go out to this people. Yeah, just looking at her notes.
Just looking at her notes, because, you know, they made sense this morning with a coffee.
Right.
Basic physiology.
Oh, physiology.
Okay, nothing pulls your reader out of a story faster than going, what the hell, that's not possible.
There is a comment that I've heard attributed to Damon Knight, and I can't remember who really it should be attributed to, probably Damon Knight, giving a critique on a story. He was not giving this critique to a piece of erotic fiction, but I like the critique even better than if he were. It is, that is not merely picturesque, that is impossible. And yeah, boom, out of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, and certainly, you know, especially for writing science fiction and fantasy, the temptation is to come up with something really different. And we've done a number of, you know, panels at various cons and so forth that basically touch on the topic of how alien can it be before it becomes utterly unbelievable, squick-worthy, and the reader stops to read. Stops reading, that's it. And, you know, and it's an interesting line. I don't think that it's necessarily not a dotted line, but it's, you know, especially for writing erotic content, when you want your reader to respond to it, it makes sense to keep it within the realms of something that is conceivably possible. Because, and for that, there's a number of decent sex ed sites out there if you're not comfortable finding out other ways, and you don't feel like doing all your own research. So one of them is an excellent starter site. There's a site called Scarletine, and it basically it's sex ed for teenagers. It's really good. It's really non-judgmental, and they answer a lot of questions where if, for example, you are a woman writing about a relationship between two men and you're not really sure how something might work, it's a place that you can start to look for some resources, and they include referrals to other places. Betty Dodson, who's written a number of books and done a number of videos on masturbation, also has a really, really good website where she talks about some things that are physically possible and less physically possible. But it's something to always kind of keep in mind when you're creating something, is that, you know, you want to keep it relatable to at least some portion of your target audience. Not everybody's going to relate to everything all the time, that's just the way it is, but you want at least some people to not be sitting there going, what the hell? You don't want the what the hell reaction, that's bad. Good job.
Yes.
If you guys know what a beta reader is, you know, somebody gets the stuff and reads through. I got to beta read a book which was not a book of erotica, but had sex scenes in it which were integral and important to the plot. And there were times in it where I said to the person who wrote it, that one doesn't actually work that way, or if your characters do this, this other thing is going to be an issue for them in about 15 minutes. Or something like that. I am very fond of the book. It is called The Last Hot Time. It's by John M. Ford. And in fact, being the beta reader of that book is how Mike and I began a 13-year relationship. So I advise beta reading it. Go with the practice.
It doesn't always work that way, just
no,
saying.
it really doesn't. Actually,
Yeah,
I
do
was
try to
being
find a
beta.
beta reader
But-
who is comfortable and knowledgeable about sex scenes and won't feel shy about telling you something like, that doesn't work like that.
Or saying, I think, I get the sense that as a writer you're holding back a little right in this place. The hell is up with that? You need a beta reader who will tell you that. If they say, actually I remember one extremely vivid discussion which ended up with me saying loudly, look, at least have the courage of your perversions. Because sometimes you need a beta reader who will say that to you and say, just write it already. Stop faffing about.
Oh, actually, I did want to put in a plug for the other prop I brought with me. This is a book that has been out of print forever, which is truly, truly unfortunate. It's called Elements of Arousal, and the subtitle is How to Write and Sell Gay Men's Erotica. But it is the single best resource out there about writing erotic fiction. And if you can get past the graphic sex between men parts, if that's an issue for you, it's an excellent, excellent book. You can pretty much only find it used. At one point, the author was going to put out an ebook version of it. I'm not sure if that's ever happened or not. I couldn't find it on his website. But I'm going to pass that around too if people can take a look at it.
Great book.
All right, you guys ready to take it from out there then? All right, hands up, who's got questions? I saw hands. We'll start with you right back there.
Yeah, well, I was, earlier when you were talking about like legality issues, and my question was like, how is that trained? I can see in the genre of like writing very specific erotica, but like how is that translatable to like more mainstream fiction when you're using erotica as a tool to further to continue on with the story? And then from that question, I also kind of wondered if you wanted to expand on just the general role of using erotica in spurring on like different genres of fiction or mainstream fiction.
Well, I mean, I not to sugarcoat it too much, but we live in a country with highly variable and rather Victorian morals in some respects. So there was an incident a couple of years ago where a couple of erotic authors who had just started their own small press were denied a lease in Iowa. And there was a big push online to help them get things like a bank loan and so forth. But there were repercussions. And they weren't based on any actual legal, they hadn't violated any laws. It was just that they wrote erotica, and it was erotica and erotic romance, and that was enough for somebody to decide that they should be denied a lease based on that. There have been instances where people have been harassed out of jobs. A lot of authors who write erotica and erotic romance write under pseudonyms, especially if they're writing, say, children's books on the side. Or in my case, when I started writing, I write under my own name and did for a long time because when I started writing, I was a temp. There was no Google. Nobody gave a crap. Now, on the other hand, it's not uncommon for me to go into an interview and somebody has Googled me up before that. So that's why I'm spinning myself off into another person, basically, as a way to compartmentalize, because there are some repercussions. And with that, so some of it is also about the perception of what you write more than it is the legal issues. An acquaintance of mine from grad school has started out her own publishing company called Forbidden Publications, and it does she's doing a lot of stuff that's focusing on the things that kind of skirt that edge. And I, to be honest, thought she was out of her mind. But one of the things that she has on her website is, and we have a lawyer on speed dial. And that is a valid concern. And I'd say that pseudonyms can be your friend. They can be
Well, I'm
very useful.
thinking like the comparison of, say, somebody eroticizing, like child pornography or something versus having a character who is 19 and another character who's 17 and they have this one experience.
The latter scenario is a lot easier, but that's relative. Easier is a very relative term there. And again, that there's usually, it's something that's pretty fraught and it's hard to get published. And if you're self-publishing, it can also impact some of your other work and how that sells and how that's perceived. So it's kind of, it's a gray zone on some of the things that aren't strictly, this is absolutely illegal. And like I said, there can be some fairly severe real-world repercussions. On the other hand, if you can get yourself in any way, shape, or form described as a literary author,
you gotta do whatever.
You have a lot more leeway.
Well, that was kind of what I was getting to.
Yeah.
They seem to be able to get away with a lot of things.
They do. Nicholson Baker. Nicholson Baker is an example of somebody who would normally be lumped in as a purely erotica writer and instead be seen as the sort of darling of literary fiction. He's pretty much just writing erotica if you read any of his work. But he's somebody who's managed to exploit that and has managed to move it in a new direction for at least his career.
I've been given to understand if you add more unhappiness, your chances of being perceived as a literary writer are much higher.
That's a good point.
Okay. So it's true.
I wouldn't be
From what I've read,
Okay.
yes, miserable characters having unhappy sex makes you more literary than characters having happy sex. Happy sex is questionable.
This begins the
It's very
which kind of art is better argument, wherein romance writers get pooped on because they write happy things.
That really is a whole nother.
That is
Called naive, but
That is a whole nother.
Or spongers.
Oh,
The
you
latest
haven't
thing.
read that article
what's
yet?
the latest line?
The latest thing was that some brilliant soul wrote this piece about how romance authors were all these women sort of sponging off their husbands.
That one was
Yeah.
that one was such blatant clickbait that I just laughed and laughed.
Yeah.
Didn't Scalzi write something about how
Yeah,
his wife
that was
supported
why
it?
Scalzi
Yeah, that's why
started the whole,
Scalzi jumped
discussion about
Sponging off.
male writers who were sponging off their wives and so forth.
Good for him.
That was a tangent. Next question.
Go ahead.
I'm
standing by.
Issues. How do you choose a pseudonym and then manage your identity online?
How do you what?
Choose a pseudonym and then manage your identity.
Pick a name that you like. Google it.
Make sure nobody else is
using it. Or at least using it in any context like that. Like if it's a somewhat kind of common-ish name and you're getting a bunch of random stuff, you're probably kind of okay. But yeah, I would say just Google it to make sure nobody's using that specifically for any kind of writing. And then you can get like a cheap website. You can just get a WordPress is totally fine. And use that as your main hub. And then I would suggest, like for self-publishing wise, it's fairly easy because you just put your name on stuff and there it is. Yeah, you just manage it as if it is, depending on how comfortable you are with having that pseudonym. A lot of people now have like open pseudonyms just for marketing purposes. Like, books under, Jade Smith are my erotica, and you'll know that because that's what she does, and books under, Tilda whatever is my other stuff. And then some people are writing kind of edgy stuff they're not totally comfortable with having people know in public, so then they keep their stuff kind of hidden. And it's depending on how much of that openness you want to have. It's possible to have something be very secret and hidden if you want to. Of course, there's always, if somebody decides to go hunting, they might be able to find you, but yeah. Yeah,
I'm in the process of exploring that, and one of the reasons I started with having a pseudonym was that I had a 3-book deal come up last year with a larger publisher, which ended up falling through in December. Ask me how that went, and no, better yet, don't. But by that point, I'd already written the novel, I'd already started developing the pseudonym, and I'd already started sending out some short fiction to establish the pseudonym. So I'm just continuing with it. And one reason I'm starting out with short fiction is also because I come out of the Spanish tradition, and it's now ingrained in my genes that you start out with short fiction and then you build up to the long stuff. And regardless of realities, it just, it's an automatic thing. And I had several editors approach me and ask me to write for anthologies, so, an open invitation is always the way to go. So yeah, so I've got a blog, and I'm hosting a number of other authors out there and doing, sort of things to get my pseudonym's name out there, but it's kind of an ongoing process. It'll probably take another, year before it takes off, and I have the same level of online presence as I do under my own name.
Yeah, I guess, how would I avoid being tagged as the guy who hates or disrespects women?
Tagged as the which?
I guess I just have this general fear. It hasn't happened yet like that, but if I put a sex scene in something, or if I have 2 female characters who are together in a story, I have this general fear that, like, I'm gonna do it wrong and then be kind of marked as the guy who hates women or the guy who doesn't respect. I've had one editor come back saying, well, you're saying all women are sluts. I was like, well, no, I'm not. She had a difficult time with the story, and that's what happened. And I guess I just have this general fear that, you kind of get tagged as that person who does it, or how do you just avoid that idea? Trying to be respectful, trying to...
3-dimensional characters are your friend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beta readers who will tell you when they're afraid that your characters are coming across as being written by somebody full of crap. I treasure people like that who tell me.
Oh yeah, I have those,
But if, I feel like I'm the wrong person to be saying this, but I'm going to try it. There's a certain kind of self-consciousness that you can get into when you're trying so hard not to make a mistake, because everything is so very fraught and oh my God, and oh my God. Go make some mistakes and revise them, for fuck's sake. I said the F word.
No, I'm going to talk this a little bit. Generally, when I moderate, I'll talk. But I wrote a novel with 2 female characters and a romance in it, and I sold it to Harlequin, and it was great. And the thing is that for one thing, I try to remember that we're all people. I hand it to my readers and say, are my trousers down around my ankles? Did I screw up here? And the 3-dimensional character thing. And then from there, I just let things fall where they may. I can't control how once it's out there. If I do all that stuff, if I sincerely, consciously do all this stuff and try to do it right, and make sure that I have got smart people, like some of the readers that I surround myself with, and the pre-readers in my writing group, to make sure that I've been right as I can be, then I just have to go on, you go on, you publish it, you write real characters, you write 3-dimensional characters, and let the chips fall where they may out in the real world. Once you publish it, that's really all you do. The only pushback I ever got was there was one reviewer who said, obviously he must have leaned on his wife a lot when he wrote this novel. And that was the hardest pushback I got, which was brilliant, I thought. There could have been worse. On the one hand, Sherry reads all my stuff. On the other hand, part of that is because my wife is a real person, and so she's a female real person, but she's a real person. And so you just bear that in mind.
I think it's a matter of you just have to do it with in your head that these are just people. And if that's the reason you want to write a story like that, like I want to write a story about XYZ because that's the story I want to write, just go forward with that confidence and just plow through it and make mistakes if you make mistakes, whatever, things happen. Get the good beta readers, like she said, and just keep going forward, because if you continue to write stories in that general vein, or female characters and things like that, the more work you get out there, the more people are going to see that you're just writing characters instead of, this guy is just writing this one type of woman. The more variety that you get out there, the more it's going to be like, well, okay, just because this one character might be perceived in a particular light, then there's another character, another character, another character. They're not able to pigeonhole you anymore.
Okay, yeah, okay.
If I may add, unfortunately, sexism being what it is, there's always going to be detractors. There are always going to be people who will say that, Michael doesn't get any credit for writing, good lesbian romance because he's a dude. There's always going to be people who say that, women can't write male characters. There's always going to be that, and so you just have to do what you guys have been saying, which is do the best that you can and not worry about the rest.
I guess it's letting go of I can control what's on the page, but I can't control people's reactions.
Conquer the fear.
Right, conquer the fear. And really, if you're that worried about, make sure that a lot of your readers are women, because they'll tell you if you're fucking up.
Yeah, a good number of mine. So, and they're all like, well, it's okay, and they're confused about.
Make sure that they know that you want your beta readers to tell you everything. Make sure that they know that you value knowing where you screwed up and that they don't have to protect your writerly ego.
Oh yeah, they are unflinching.
I'm not going to go off into a long tangent on this one, but I recently ran an important plot sequence in the long thing I'm working with past someone who is a labor historian and a historian of a bunch of things that I needed to run this past him for. And he was able to tell me of one of my major plot developments. Yeah, I see why it's attractive to you to want to have X happen in here. You need to know that you are precisely recreating the racist ideology of so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so in your time period of this and that, and I don't think you know that, and you need to think about that. And he was right, and I had to totally rebuild something, and the fact that he called me on it let me finally get a handle on what certain of my other characters in that story were doing, would feel about what was happening, etc. And so, in other words, being told I was full of crap and needed to rebuild makes the story better.
So, to the mechanics of it, how do you use the mouthfeel of words or the rhythm of what you're writing in different sections to bring the reader into a more sensory experience, even before you get to the sex scene, word choice and things like that?
I'll take that one. It's just that I just talked. That one's really important to me because I write poetry as well as prose. But the question for me is this likely to be read aloud, or is this going to be read by someone silently in their head? And that is part of what I used to think about, how the mouth feel and the mind feel are different, if you know what I mean, when you're reading it. And yeah, one of the goals that I have had when doing certain short stuff is if I can't get them to want to be able to stop and take a break and fan themselves when they're reading it, I'm not done yet. You know what I mean?
And I read everything aloud. One of my particular bugbears as a writer is that when I'm writing a given piece, after a while I come up with a word that I really like, and then I use it again.
Like it, right.
And again. So it's one of the things that I'm always looking for, because I'm conscious of it now, largely because when I'm reading it aloud, I'm like, boy, that was great the first 2 times I did it. And now we need to stop. And so that's certainly a part of it. I generally avoid using, the more common words that can also be used as expletives, as curses when I write erotica. Some of that's comfort level, some of it's sellability, some of it is just stylistic. It's just how I write. We talked a little bit about writing dialogue. Dialogue is not arg with 14 exclamation marks. Okay? It's not, oh my God, in capital letters with multiple exclamation marks and a smiley face. Don't do that. You laugh. I'm just saying. There are certain things that people have learned to associate with writing about sex that are often bad things that you don't want to replicate. And one of them is the oh God thing with the multiple exclamation marks. So what you're writing for is, believability. What does that scene do? How does it move things forward? If there's dialogue, is the dialogue moving it forward? Is it telling the reader something that the reader didn't know at the start of that paragraph? If it's not, why is it there? And that I think is always kind of the ultimate stylistic choice that you make about any writing that you do.
There are certain words that some people react to, and it is difficult because some people think particular words are completely fine in a sex scene and even are arousing and nice, and some people, that's a word to them that they don't like. And there is no real way, unless you're writing for a very specific market with certain guidelines, there is really no way to know what somebody's going to react to certain words about. So I would say just kind of what is your comfort level with particular words and how they are used in that scene? Or what would the characters, sometimes you maybe a character is very sexually active and they're totally comfortable with slinging around words. If it's kind of third person their perspective or whatever, they might be really comfortable with using particular words about anatomy. And maybe in a different scene, somebody else is very conservative and even thinking those words makes them feel shy. So they might be using much more technical terms or even kind of alluding to body parts rather than using those words. And I think that actually is really important. Just what is the character that you're using the perspective of? What words would they use?
Or if you can get them excited enough to use a word they wouldn't normally use. There's a thing on a micro-writing level too. And I'm talking about sentence structure and sentence length. I'm thinking about how I want to phrase this. Just as when sometimes one is, or two, or however many, are doing certain sexual activities, and there are points when changing up the rhythm makes things even more so is true about writing the sentences. You can change how your reader is breathing by how long you make a sentence, by whether you suddenly go from a florid style with many subordinate clauses to direct, we're on the train now. You can do that. Or you can stop in the middle of that and just, my favorite thing is, can you stop in the middle of that headlong rush and have the whole thing hang suspended in the air for a minute when they think it's never going to happen, but it's also inevitable? That's worth doing.
Yeah.
Okay. Two questions, one of which I don't think anybody here can answer. The first, the one I don't think I can get an informed answer here about is deaf people talking in bed.
What's the question?
Okay, the other one is what one or more character is, and one or both or all characters are telepathic.
Oh yeah, that's been.
Oh, safe words.
Safe words, yes. Cecilia Tan has done a whole series of anthologies. The main one is Telepaths Don't Need Safe Words. So yeah, there's a whole series of things on various telepathic takes, interior dialogue versus exterior dialogue. And
I'm going to ask Michael to relay the first question, which I think was about deaf characters, because I'm hearing impaired and I can't lip read you. I'm really sorry. So what was the question?
I think the question that Dan was trying to get at was, sex pillow talk pre, during, after for people who are deaf.
Okay.
I want to see where you go with this.
See,
I used to work in the deaf community too.
Yeah, well, see, and I'm a hard of hearing person, a deaf person who's not part of the deaf community, which is a whole other thing too. Don't assume that deaf people are one size fits all in terms of how life works. That said, yeah, you really don't want somebody whispering sweet nothings into your deaf character's ear, because you know that's not going to work.
That's not going to work.
Although I will say that you can get a certain amount of characterization from characters laughing together about the need to shout sweet nothings into each other's ears. Because that is kind of a bonding experience.
Okay, but let's see, it is a little difficult. I'm thinking of characters who are deaf enough that they need to use sign language.
You know, I don't think that would be a problem. Now, I'm gonna.
There's deaf erotica. Okay.
Yeah, there's deaf
Read the
erotica.
deaf erotica. Watch this.
Yeah, I used to work for a company called Harris Communications, and I was deeply into the deaf community for quite. You know who they are, over at UP. And the thing is that a lot of our staff, I was one of the few actually hearing people on the staff, and it was because I was in the warehouse, which was a fairly dangerous environment. They didn't realize how visually impaired I was. My wife just grins.
That must have been the happiest day for everyone involved.
It really was. But you know, the thing is that besides just the sign language aspect, there's also just the touch aspect, and getting people, and a lot of times the attention would change, and I would watch this amongst the sales staff and in the break room. The attention would change depending on where the touch was and how forceful the touch was. And that would tell them what I am about to convey to you. And then we might get into the sign language. And sign language, when we see it at like conversions at Ville Tennis, looks very big, but it can also be very small and very quick and very subtle. So I think that, you know, as far as Pello talking, I think that sign language would work fine. I think that touch convey would work fine, and you know, I wonder if the physical aspect would be even heightened up a little bit because you don't have the sound aspect.
And I think the answer is there are many real persons out there living this. Go find some of them who are writing about it and talking about it and learn how it really works.
There's probably a forum out there someplace.
And make sure you don't impose your fantasy version. If you're not a hearing impaired person, if you're not a deaf person, make sure you don't go, oh, and then of course, but you do this sign and you'd insert blah, blah, blah.
Right.
You know, it's like, no, don't give me that. Don't give me that.
I would bet you money there's a forum out there someplace.
Oh, God, yeah, I'm sure.
Boo.
Yeah, so there was a movie where it was only one of them that were deaf, but they were signing to each other. And so they were in bed. They had, you know, when they're right next to each other, it's hard to sign to one another. They would set up a mirror. And it was actually a really nice visual in that movie. Was that they were just signing to the mirror. Nice. They were both, you know, to each other that way. So.
Nice.
Yep.
We're getting close sometimes, so who we got? Conrad, right here in my non-existent peripheral vision. I forgot he was there.
He's at Tenda for an hour and a half.
Research. Would you, what types and kinds of research have you done? Have you explored things that you were interested in writing about or experienced at? What kinds of things? What was it like?
I was a secretary for a dominatrix for quite some time.
You've had an interesting life.
Wow, yeah. But it means that you can get actually research out of the darndest places and the darndest other jobs. But really going back to the question about deaf community and signing and sex, there's people out there with lives who are talking about how the life works. Your best bet is always to read a wide range of people talking about it, because no one person's experience of how particular flavor of sex, you know, there is no, this is what gay men do, all of them. And this takes this long, and that takes that long.
Are you done yet? Are you done yet?
Oh my God, it's not true love. You haven't, you know, you're late. What's you've been stepping out on me.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and with that, there are a number. There's actually several books out about sex and disability that you can go check out. A couple of years ago, I was asked to write a novella that was based on Yowie, so it had to have a lot of the and I'm going to just apologize to fans in the room, the more formulaic aspects of yaoi in a story, and it had to fit certain other parameters. And I wasn't particularly knowledgeable about it. So I rang up some friends who were big anime and manga fans and said, okay, what am I watching? What am I reading? So a couple of minutes later, somebody showed up on my doorstep with a stack this high, handed it to me, and I said, thanks. And for the next 2 days, I did absolutely nothing except read through that stack of books and watch whatever they gave me. And picked up a few more things after that, and by the end of it, I really understood what I was doing. The formula really clear.
I would say try to find people who are good at that kind of thing and just ask them, like, what could I do? Because like Google is helpful in general, but it's not going to get you like the deep stuff really.
I want to disagree with that. Don't ask people directly, do your research first, because oh my God, is it tiring.
No, I meant like ask, let's say if you're interested in writing erotica, go to erotica writers and say, what are your best pieces of research? Like get,
pointers.
Because Google will get you kind of the broad sense of stuff, but I would say, somebody who's actually doing this as, a major part of their job or whatever, like, they might be able to point you at the really good resources to start from. Don't ask them every don't ask them every little thing, or don't approach them and say, could you read my stuff? Just say, I want to know what the best places to go for research are, because there might be stuff that's not coming up, especially with this stuff, might not come up on Google.
There's another thing about just narrowing it to sex and disability stuff. Don't pick the obvious disabilities all the time. There's a lot of stuff in life that is disability issues that a lot of people don't label as such, don't think of as such. And I would love to see more depth, more complexity, more.
Yeah, if the phrase that comes to your mind is, how do you people do X, and that's your starting place, you haven't done your research yet.
I wanted to address the legal part just a little bit. I have a question. So Britain last year passed a law that made erotic, non-consensual erotic fiction functionally illegal. I wanted to know what your thoughts were on, where your comfort level is when you get into these kind of ultimately rape is a horrible thing. We all can agree with that. Where are those lines for you guys? Where do you think the laws, more specifically, should be? Obviously, we can all say rape is bad and this is bad and whatever, but where do you think the government's responsibility to censor interferes with creative, with your creativity as an author?
Well, the term in the online writing communities is non-consensual sex, and a lot of people write it and do quite well with it. It is outside my comfort zone. It is not something I do. For me, it's much more fun to eroticize how consent is given and how consent is interpreted than it is to have it be a non-consensual scene. It's not something that I want to do. The extent to which I think that can be made illegal, okay, Gone with the Wind. I'm thinking they probably did not pull that off every bookshelf in bookstore in Great Britain. It's just a bunch.
It's got non-con in it.
And it's got some serious non-con in it. And it's certainly not the only work that's considered for a variety of reasons a classic that has elements of that. The Brontes. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of things out there that deal with that. So I understand the law's concerned with protecting people who are vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so, for me, child porn is like this sort of massive squick thing, ooh, gross. So I understand the rationale there. I question some of the ways that it's implemented. And I think that for me is probably, it's kind of it's a discussion thing that we really need to kind of shake out for me to really understand some of the implications of why they were doing this. I think that across the board saying that non-con shouldn't be legal, to me, I'd much rather see non-con be unappealing. And that,
Yeah.
to me,
Yeah.
is far more valuable than making it illegal.
I'm going to send you back to the Scarlettine website, which was mentioned earlier, because Heather Carina, who has been instrumental in that website, was, by the way, the only woman to testify in the COPA hearings, the Child Online Protection Act, which is where this came up before. And I'm pretty sure that Heather has some stuff online about the very issues of when you restrict certain writings availability, do you also take away the availability of somebody who is 16 and in a relationship where they're being sexually pressured to find information out about it and to, one hopes, get the hell out safely. So there's a lot of stuff. It seems to me that maybe this is part of that whole dichotomy of, well, this is literature and then this is that sexy literature stuff. Then let's restrict this, but if it happens in here, we call it by a different name. So, you know what I mean?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many examples of when somebody says, well, let's just, you know, kick out all of the extreme erotica, and then it's like, whoa, Lolita, you know, like,
Yeah.
nobody's pulling that off the shelf, you know, that kind of thing, where I think the government's role should be as minimal as possible in any kind of restriction. Otherwise, I think the market, society, whatever kind of pressures we want to put on stuff should be more like the unappealing thing. Like, it should be unappealing to
Tell the
certain
truth
degree.
about it. Tell the truth about it.
But
Tell them.
there's places for, we need to be honest. Like, these things happen. I just like the whole, like, let's keep kids away from sex. Well, they're having sex.
Yeah,
like,
good luck
what
with that.
kind of, you know, what kind of fantasy world are you living in that, you know, 16-year-olds don't know anything about sex?
Yes, and anytime anybody says, let's keep kids safe from sex, what they mean is, let's keep kids safe from information, and I hate that.
Yes.
This is the Scarlettine site that we're talking about, and this is the Erotic Readers and Writers Association website. Let me know if you need a translation.
It's fucking legible.
A lot.
All right, we're down to 5, so I want to get closings from my panelists. Anything you guys just want to close on?
Hey, y'all look at it.
Because you're at the far end.
Because I'm there.
You took that seat.
What I write, what I live, and what I read for fun do not necessarily overlap. So you don't always know what you're going to write until you write it, and then you go, uh-oh, I seem to be a horror writer. or whatever.
Yeah, I accidentally wrote a romance. That's how I started.
So I guess what I'm saying is let it surprise you, because if it's not surprising you now, then you're not really comfortable.
There's probably an anonymous group for that.
Accidental romance.
I blundered into this.
And now I'm hooked.
Read a lot. If you're going to write in something, read a lot. Don't just read what's popular. Don't just read what's award-winning. Read things that you're seeing recommended on blogs. Read things that other people are recommending to you. Try out things that are at least somewhat outside your comfort zone to see what's out there and to see how other people are doing it. Your best teachers are always going to be other writers, because they're doing things with techniques that you can learn from. Sometimes what you learn from them is, I'm not doing that. But at least it gives you a place to start with.
I would say feel free to explore all the stuff that interests you. Don't be afraid of it. Question your fear every time. If you're writing a scene and you start backing away, question why you're doing that. Is it serving the story to do a fade to black? Does it not fit there? Or are you just worried that you're going to do badly in a sex scene if you're not experienced with it or something? Just push forward, try new things, challenge yourself.
All right, thank you guys. Thank you, audience.